Maybe we'll begin with just a couple of minutes to settle ourselves. If you'd like to close your eyes and just check in with yourself right now. Hopefully we'll have a couple more opportunities to do this during the talk today. Just open to, you can, to whatever's present right now. You know, any things you can do to let yourself settle and be as comfortable as you can be right now. And just as we're as we're sitting this initial couple of minutes, I just want to begin this, not begin the talk formally yet, but just begin with sharing my own gratitude. My gratitude for being here with you all of us together. I'm very grateful for the way each one of you has shown up, and the heartfulness and the sincerity of your practice. I mean, that really has come across strongly to me, and I know to the other teachers as well, through the meetings, small group meetings, and through our time together here and the questions and everything. So just really a bow of appreciation. And also just reflecting on gratitude to have this time. You know, for myself, I recognized as I was just sitting and reflecting on giving this talk in the last hour or so, how, you know, I would be entering 2022 in a very different place, you know, if I hadn't had this opportunity to practice with you and practice together, as well as kind of, you know, reflecting on the teachings and doing as much of the, you know, the sharing of the Dharma as I could do, as well as I could do, and really appreciating that, and in a sense, really appreciating the opportunity to give this talk today, because it's helped me get myself in a good place for this year ahead, and that's kind of going to be the theme of what I share today with you. Yeah, so just kind of touching into that, connecting with that gratitude, and invite you, if you like, to just touch into any gratitude you might feel, you know, for whatever it is. You know, I just meant thinking as well of my partner here, Rebecca, who, you know, has given me a lot of space over these days, as I know many of your family members and partners have as well, and other family, you know, other close ones. And just really appreciating her for that, and everyone who's helped to allow us to be here in, you know, in this way over these days. You know, we easily disconnect from that and take things for granted. I know I do, and you know, it's lovely to kind of touch into that. It's nice. I remember, I think I started when my reflections at the very beginning with gratitude, and I think I want to kind of finish off as well this, you know, remembering that, you know. So, you know, anytime you're ready, just, you know, if you like to keep your eyes closed or open them, whatever's comfortable for you. I'll just share the theme of the talk today is 3 gifts or keys of the Dharma. I haven't quite worked out what the best metaphor is yet, whether it's gifts or keys, or maybe it's both, of the Dharma, that we can actually take with us leaving the retreat, if we choose to. You know, it's completely up to us if we want to. And I'm going to offer them as three very powerful gifts. And I'm going to begin, you know, this is the last day of 2021. We've been in this very, very, very unusual period of history that none of us have experienced in our lives. You know, maybe if somebody was 102, they would have been around as a baby for the Spanish flu, you know, but we haven't been through a period of almost 2 years of worldwide pandemic, you know, and that's affected us all in, you know, in hugely and in very different ways. So I'm going to begin with some reflections, and the reflections come, I guess how I want to say this, it kind of these reflections are mainly coming from what I call everyday mind. You know, they're kind of the mind where, you know, we're kind of working out how to transact and work out our day and get by and through in the world, get by in the world and do what we need to do and take care of things and all of that, which I distinguish here from, you know, what, you know, both I and Tricia reference the poem, many different translations, but it's translated in Stephen Mitchell's book, The Enlightened Heart, an anthology of sacred poetry. It's by Seng San and Shin Min, The Mind of Absolute Trust. And most of this talk today will be coming, I won't say it's coming from the mind of absolute trust so much as it's speaking to the way, the mind of absolute trust, that deeper knowing within us, you know, that kind of Buddha mind, what Ajahn Chah called the one who knows. And the majority of the talk will be coming from that space of kind of attempting as best I can to, you know, to channel the Dharma, the wisdom of the Dharma, you know, which is not my wisdom, but it's, you know, if I'm capable of, I'll try and channel it as best I can. So the three, just to come back, the theme is of the talk is these three keys, three gifts of the Dharma, and I meant to say what they are, and I'm going to call the first one the key of insight leading to freedom, the key of insight, understanding, wisdom, leading to freedom. The second is the key of love, the key of love, the key of opening our heart and accessing our heart and touching into the heart, all of the heart practices, which I'm very grateful that they've had. I feel we've given them a very central place in the retreat, you know, whether it's the meditations, the inclusion in the talks and in the instructions. I think we've done a pretty good job, and not always the same. Retreats vary, but I think we've attempted really, and maybe it's because of where we come from, each of us, you know, as teachers, I think maybe touching into the heart. So that's the second, the key of love or opening the heart. And the third is the key of aspiration or intention, you know, touching into our deepest intention and how that can support us. So I want to talk about the way each of these keys can help us, you know, in a profound way, in a powerful way, as we go back into our lives. And all we have to do really is to remember, and that's, and quote all, because it's very easy not to remember, it's very easy to forget. So all we have to do is remember, and I'm putting these out as, you know, if you can remember these, and there's other ways we can frame it, you know, this is just one framing that, you know, is very meaningful to me at this particular moment. At another time, I might share them in a different way, and other teachers in different ways. So I want to start kind of at the ground level, you know, kind of here we are, the last day of 2021. And it's a time we typically do kind of look at, okay, the ending of a year, the year ahead. You know, sometimes we might make resolutions and have intentions of what we're going to give attention to. I think a lot of that's healthy. It can be not so healthy, but mostly it's pretty healthy and useful to do. And I think just taking the time to reflect on our intentions is very helpful. You know, I think we can get into trouble sometimes with resolutions and we can beat ourselves up, etc. But reflecting on intention is good. And so, you know, I was reflecting on the year ahead, and the thing that I noticed that it kind of comes to me as we start, not so much that I'm feeling it now, but when I was reflecting on it was a sense of almost like hitting a wall. I wasn't kind of feeling like, yes, you know, what's that song? No, the film is It's a Wonderful Life, but the lovely, life being wonderful and lovely, and I can't remember the song, but it's a very, very obvious one. And I kind of wasn't feeling that. I was feeling somewhat a little bit more like trepidation, kind of like, not from my personal situation, but just kind of more from the global situation that we're in the middle of. And I'm sure for many of you may be feeling something like the same. So this talk is kind of very much speaking to that. And I do want to just pause for a minute and kind of invite you to reflect. And again, this is just for a couple of minutes, just reflect on your own situation. And if you think of like, okay, entering the year ahead, just notice what comes up for you. When you think of your own situation, your relationships, your family life, work, health, finances, the things that, tend to weigh heavily on us, can be very positive or can be more challenging. Just see what comes up. Is there a sense of a deep breath and a deep sense of aspiration, or is it more tentative, or is it more kind of defended? And just notice, meeting whatever is here with compassionate curiosity, just curious and kind. Okay, what am I noticing? What comes up? As I, and maybe take another 30 seconds or so and just notice, holding it all with kindness, with acceptance. Just time-wise, I'm not gonna, it'd be nice to kind of hear from you, what comes up. And feel free to, if you wanted to put something down in the comments of just what comes up, please feel free to do that. I'm not gonna kind of take a lot of time now just because there's a fair amount of material to cover, but I am very interested and, would love to hear, and maybe later on you could share it, later on in the talk. So just see how that lands for you, how it is for you. So we're all in this, I guess where I begin is just we're in this period of, it's very, very unusual time in history, in our own lives. Every one of us, I think it's fair to say, has been affected in very real ways by the pandemic and the changes that it's wrought in so many different areas of life. I was thinking of this and thinking, well, there might be somebody doing a 3-year Tibetan Buddhist retreat who might, not be aware of this, or maybe, fairly oblivious, but almost everybody in the world is really affected. And so that's, I think even just recognizing that and pausing and taking it in, recognizing first we're not alone, but also just to bring kindness to ourselves for what we're holding, and recognizing too, we're all holding very different realities. Some of us have been able to navigate and negotiate, teaching from home or working from home, and it's been relatively, in that level, maybe relatively smooth, and others have been on the front lines in healthcare and teaching and other things, and much more challenging, much more risk of, catching COVID and all of that, and just recognizing that it's very, very different, and it's very unequal, and but we're all affected. And I just want to name some other things just from my own personal experience. There's our own lives and how, what we're faced with, the things I invited you to just reflect briefly on, of, relationships and partners and children and aging parents and work, health, all of those things, money, you know, play a big role in our life. But the other thing that plays a big role is, you know, the sea that we're swimming in. You know, we're swimming in this sea of society, and the society we live in, you know, most of us here in America, United States, but also Canada, some other countries as well. We're very much affected by what's going on around us. You know, our lives are completely affected by our relationships. And there's a lot that makes it, you know, when I kind of felt I was hitting, you know, coming up against a wall and not feeling a sense of great optimism and hope and all of that in my everyday mind, you know, I thought about, well, what are the main factors? And I'm just going to name what some of them are for me. One is just the incredible, incredible level of depth of division there is in the country, and in many countries as well. It's not just in the US, but the struggles, you know, the struggles in the US, obviously, there's a depth of it, I think, happening here. But, you know, around vaccinations, around masks, around, and how deep those divisions, you know, go, you know, how polarizing it is. And it really, it kind of tears at my heart just that we are so divided, you know. And, you know, I certainly have my views on all of these issues, as I presume everyone else does, you know. And yet it's so easy for us to kind of create, Tara Brach talks about the unreal other, those people, whoever they are, you know, it doesn't matter what our view is, but those people. And they tend to be the bad people, the wrong people, the people that have the wrong view on this. And we solidify them, we create separation, and there's suffering, you know, and there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of pain around the separation. And I don't mean to say that all views are equal by any means, but, you know, I think there are wiser views and there are less wise views, but the real issue is the suffering. You know, there's such tremendous suffering. And I see the way in which, you know, if somebody were lying on the street having had a heart attack, we wouldn't ask if they had a COVID card or whether they were, well, I suppose you've got health concerns, but you wouldn't ask who they voted for, you know, before helping them. That heart would reach out naturally in compassion and care, I think, for almost all of us. And yet, these differences between us feel so existential, and they cause us such suffering. So that kind of tears, certainly it tears at my heart. And then not just around COVID, but around here in the United States, particularly around politics, you know, and that's really real. I mean, the way, again, I'm speaking for myself, I see in some ways the most significant threat to democracy, certainly in my lifetime, perhaps in the last 100 or more years. And we're really in the middle of it right now. And I find that really, really painful. And I'm not coming at that from a place of judgment or right, you know, but just as a place of observation. And people could disagree with the observation, but it feels, you know, I have to say my own, you know, as you know, I wasn't born in the United States. I'm a citizen. I've been, you know, have been for almost 30 years. But, you know, for me, what America is and what America can be is really important to me. You know, I have a sense of America, the United States, as in terms of possibility, in terms of hope, in terms of the kind of vision of an inclusive society, of welcoming the huddled masses, you know, warm, you know, an openness to immigration, to diversity, for kind of us all coming together, you know, a more perfect union, you know. You know, I think of Abraham Lincoln, I think of Martin Luther King, you know, the hope of America, not, you know, not so much its troubled beginnings and, you know, enslavement of millions of Africans and the whole history of slavery and Jim Crow, but the hope, really, you know, the hope of, you know, coming from the civil rights movement. And I maybe come back to this towards the end of the talk, but how painful that is to see I was thinking of hanging by a thread. Maybe it's more than a thread, but it's very, very vulnerable and under threat at the moment. And we're in a period that I think is a very, very, very difficult period. And I don't know what the answers are right now. And that's kind of like the wall I come up against with my everyday mind. But I just putting that out to kind of to name it. You know, and if insofar as I tried to think my way through, kind of going back to Trisha's talk about thinking our way through things, you know, I can't think my way through it right now. You know, I have a lot of education and a lot of work in politics and political science and law and all of that. I can't think my way out. You know, something's going to happen, but I don't know what it is. You know, what's been helpful in this last year, which I found a really, really hard year, not so much from the COVID standpoint, but from the political standpoint, was when I'm very, very interested and engaged in the political world. But it's very easy then to kind of get sucked in and pulled in and get kind of tossed around by it. And then when I felt that in this, particularly over the period of the elections and after the elections, when I felt myself pulled into that, I felt, okay, I remembered, I said, I don't have to hold this on my own. I don't have to hold this on my own. You know, the illusion that I get into, and I think many of us get into when we get caught up, is I've got to have the answer to this. I've got to solve this. I've got to do this. I've got to do something. So then just to say, oh, it's all of us holding this together. And then there's a sense of coming back and say, okay, it's okay. You know, I can come back. It's still a challenge, but it's one that we're all in together. You know, it's like coming back to the gift of Sangha, of community, and then kind of broadening out more from there to the global situation, you know, particularly climate change. It feels so, in some ways, it feels so insoluble. The possibility of getting collective action from hundreds of, you know, almost 200 nations around the world to do what we need to do to keep temperatures, you know, below 1.5 to 2 degrees above what it was at the beginning of the, you know, Industrial Revolution. We're already pushing the edge of that. And when my mind goes to that, you know, it's hard to think, how do we get the collective wisdom and the political will to work together as a world? Are we in a place to do that? And again, I kind of hit up against the wall on that, and I can't think my way through it. And so that's kind of where I come to in my everyday mind when I kind of look ahead. And that's the kind of the, you know, the part where I find I can get tangled until I come back and begin to untangle. And what I really want to focus on, and you know, kind of making the transition to the keys and the gifts, is, you know, images and metaphors are good and helpful, but one I just came to was kind of an iceberg, you know, the iceberg with the ice above the water. And, you know, what's above the water is this kind of challenging, difficult, tumultuous, painful time. And beneath the water is this huge, huge iceberg. And below the water, you know, is the depth of wisdom that we can touch into, that we can access, that can support us in dealing with, you know, what's more tumultuous on the surface. And everything I'm going to talk about from now on is really about what's under the surface, you know, and what we've got to kind of sometimes got to dive down to connect with and then to bring back into the world. You know, I started off early with Martha Postlethwaite's poem, Clearing. You know, remember, she says, do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is yours alone to sing falls into your open, cupped hands and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue. So I think of this as kind of diving back down into the heart of the Dharma for the strength and the resilience to help us go into the world, that some of these things I've named, and I could have named 20 more, and you could too, of the challenges, including our own challenges in our own lives, and how this depth and richness of the Dharma can help us, as we come back into the world, this world so worthy of rescue. The other image is one Tara Brach uses, and I think other teachers often use, is to think of the waves. The waves right now, I think, are very turbulent, tempestuous, a lot of activation. Our boats are being tossed around, I think. Most of us, just living in these times, it's not an easy negotiation. At least I don't find it easy to negotiate our life. Even, with my main work being, sharing these teachings, this is what I do, pretty much every day of the week. And yet it's still very easy, it's possible to get kind of swept up in things. And so, so to think of the waves on the water, and then under the water is this, even the biggest wave is like whatever, 50, 60 feet or something, a big wave. But then we've got thousands and thousands of feet of the ocean underneath. And this is the richness, the resources that we have available to us, kind of, that we can plunge down into, that we can access, and that we can marinate in, and coming back to that word metabolize, it can metabolize us. We can kind of absorb it into our very fiber, into our being, so that that's what we're bringing into the world. So I'm coming now, taking a little bit longer than I wanted to on that initial part, but wanted to come to the first of the gifts. If we think of kind of leaving here with gifts, the first one, and it's not a gift from me, it's a gift from the Dharma, obviously, but it's the key of insight. And I do think for this one, I find the metaphor of the key a really helpful one, putting the key in the door and turning the lock and opening the door to get through. I wondered why the key wasn't one of the Buddha's metaphors. And then I did a Google search, and I found there weren't many keys around 2,500 years ago. They had been invented, but there weren't many of them, big key to open a silo or somewhere you keep your hay. Anyway, I digress. So the key of insight, this is maybe just a pause that will both kind of let you take in whatever's present for you, and also for me to kind of transition into this key of insight. And just opening to what's present, meeting it with friendliness, with kindness. And this key of insight, this key of freedom, is really, the way I see it, is it's the opportunity at any moment in our life to just shine the spotlight on ourselves and our life at that moment, and ask ourselves, where am I suffering? Is there suffering right now? Where am I suffering? And to really, I'm going to just mention first the 4 steps, the 4 key parts of this key. The first is just to recognize and acknowledge our suffering. So often when we're suffering, we don't acknowledge it. We blame somebody else. You did this to me, rather than saying, okay, this is painful, this hurts, and really opening to it. So recognizing the kind of radical honesty, recognizing and acknowledging what's present. The second of the keys is to see and understand our own role within our suffering, our own role in our suffering. This is the second noble truth of seeing where we're holding on. And the third is to see that once we see our own role in our suffering, the role that we're playing ourselves, and I'll unpack this a little bit. So, but seeing our own role in it, we can open, we can let go, and we can find freedom in that letting go of craving, letting go of clinging, letting go of aversion. And then that's the third noble truth. And the fourth noble truth is that there is a path, a skillful path of training in training the mind in meditation, training ourselves in virtue, ethics, living wisely and compassionately, and cultivating wisdom. These three kind of baskets of what the Buddha called the Eightfold Path. So these are the four elements. And I want to begin just with acknowledging our suffering. Suffering can take many forms and, have many expressions. I think I might have mentioned this earlier, but if I didn't, a teacher, Tony Bernhard, in one of the Buddhist magazines, gave 14 synonyms for suffering, or for dukkha, the Pali word for suffering. She said suffering, pain, unease, discontent, unsatisfactoriness, unhappiness, affliction, I'm happy to share these, anxiety, dissatisfaction, discomfort, anguish, stress, misery, frustration, all of these just as different expressions of suffering. But the essence is to recognize that something is happening that we're not really liking it happening. It could be wanting something we don't have, and like, oh, there's a need I have and it's not being met, and there's a contraction around that, or there's aversion, there's pushing away experience. Just take an example, a simple, mundane example. Your neighbor has a dog and it barks all hours of the day and night, and you feel really annoyed, you feel really pissed off at the neighbor, you find it unpleasant. Your mind goes to how thoughtless your neighbor is. Don't they have any respect for the neighbors, etc. We maybe get angry with them. Sometimes we might feel guilt with ourselves about, I should be a better practitioner, I shouldn't be getting so angry. We can judge ourselves for judging. All of this is just different parts of suffering. And the first step we have to take is just to acknowledge that we're suffering, just to kind of say, yes, this is true, it's happening. Not to blame anyone else, because the tendency is to blame the neighbor and like they're causing my suffering. Well, they're not causing your suffering. They're generating something, but your suffering is yours to hold, mine to hold, and this is really the key. If we push it outward or we repress it, then we're not going to deal with it. We're not going to acknowledge it. It's not going to be a path to freedom. So the first step is to acknowledge it. Say, yes, this is painful. This hurts. This is difficult. I'm wanting things to be different than they are. Can I just accept that? Yeah, it's hard right now. It's painful. And the second key or element of this key is to really recognize that the Buddha said, craving is the cause of suffering. And a way of translating that is to say that we are involved in our own suffering. We are implicated in our own suffering. There's something we're doing or not doing or believing that is actually keeping us hooked in suffering. This is really, really, really important. It's not in any way to blame ourselves or to judge ourselves or beat ourselves up. In no way I'm saying that. I'm not saying, oh, I'm a bad person for this. It's to really just acknowledge the truth that if I'm blaming that neighbor for the dog barking and I'm caught up in righteousness and judgment, that's a second arrow, to use that metaphor, that I'm adding. the dog barking is the first arrow. Yes, it wakes me in the night and I want to sleep. You know, that's painful, that's difficult, but it doesn't need, it's only when I add this, they're doing this, they shouldn't be doing this, why are they doing this, I'm going to do this. Then we get into that contraction. That's the suffering part of it. So this is the second part of the key, to recognize that we are implicated, that we're involved. Again, not blaming, judging, but that we're involved in that process of creating suffering. And this is key to ending suffering, because if we're involved in the creation of the suffering, what comes out of that is we can be involved in the undoing of the suffering. Just as we can crave and cling, we can let go of craving and clinging, and that letting go is the third noble truth. That's the freedom that comes, nirvana, Buddha talked about, the complete ending of suffering. And we've talked about letting go a little, letting go a lot, letting go completely. You know, it's not all or nothing. We can, you know, we can practice and let go more and more and more and more until hopefully we can let go completely in this lifetime, maybe in another lifetime. So this letting go, this seeing where we're holding on, that we are, and that also involves a kind of radical honesty and really turning towards ourselves without judgment, with kindness, and say, where am I holding here? Where am I holding on? It doesn't mean to say that the other person isn't doing something they shouldn't be doing. They could even be breaking the law. You know, it could be a lot of things. That's a kind of operating on another level, if you like, you know, when the rightness is on another level, because our suffering is really independent of that, whether they're doing, you know, like the verse of the mind of absolute trust, you know, of, you know, we're clinging to something, even if it's righteousness, even if it's enlightenment, we're clinging to something, and to see where we're clinging and just to acknowledge that. And when we see it clearly, it can be like letting go of a burning coal, you know, that we can, it was like, oh, I don't want to keep on holding this. It's burning me. Like forgiveness, you know, I don't want to keep, you know, blaming this person and hating them. There's something, you know, if I can let go of that blaming and if I can forgive, then there's a real freedom that can come. You know, the Dalai Lama has often been asked about, you know, sending compassion every day to the Chinese authorities who've done such terrible harm to his country, the Tibetan people, their culture, all of that. Why do you send compassion? Why do you send loving kindness to them? And he says, you know, if I hate them, then I'm gonna be suffering. I'm holding the burning coal. And he also recognizes that they're suffering themselves, that anyone who causes suffering in the way they have is suffering themselves and deserving of compassion, you know. So letting go of clinging, leading to the end of suffering, the third noble truth. And then, you know, the fourth noble truth is really all of the skillful means that can help us to sow the soil, till the soil, provide the nurturance to help us let go. You know, it doesn't all happen immediately and easily for most of us. We have to keep working. We have to work on our own ethics. You know, if we're doing stuff in our life that is causing us, you know, contraction, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm doing it, then that can really affect both our meditation. We feel, you know, there's something out of kilter. It can affect our behaviors and all of that. So that it can often take time to, you know, that's why the Buddha put this eightfold path together of training in all these different ways, training in meditation, wise effort, wise mindfulness, wise concentration, training in speech, action, livelihood. How am I living my life? How am I engaging with my family, with my work mates, my work colleagues, etc.? How am I engaging with people I don't even know very well? But, you know, what is the nature? How open is my heart? All of these, cultivating the clear seeing, the wisdom that's possible, that really takes us to letting go and freedom. So that really is the first, if you think of that, if you think of leaving here, leaving this retreat, if you could leave thinking like, and again, it's something to work with if it's helpful to you. If just thinking about this it's almost like as a template, but it's a very live template. It's not a ritualistic template or anything else. It's a very live template. Where is my suffering? Where am I clinging? Can I let go? And what will help me in this process of letting go? What training of the heart and the mind will help me in this letting go? Just this template of the Four Noble Truths. And I've just put it out in a kind of a very concise kind of a way, but just seeing that this is something we can bring. I can't say the number of times that I've come back to this and said, okay, after denying suffering in different ways for a while and being caught up in whatever I might be caught up in, then say, oh yeah, I really am suffering now. And then asking myself, what am I holding on to? And I think I can honestly say over this last decade or two, there hasn't been a time when I've asked that question where it hasn't been helpful to me in finding my own place in creating suffering. I don't mean that there isn't still work to do. There are places maybe I haven't looked at, definitely. But each time I come back, I find, oh, yes, there is something. I'm believing something should be a certain way. I'm believing this person should be different. This situation should be different. I don't like this. I don't want this. I'm holding on to that. And that allows that kind of space and that soil really to kind of let go, to begin the process of letting go, even if it's not all at once, what we do in forgiveness practice and compassion practice can be, that's a similar kind of process. So thinking about that in your own life, is this something that's helpful, that might be helpful to you as you go back into your life to think, okay, can I use this kind of key? And you can elaborate it and read much more about it and kind of come to understand in the deepest possible way the Four Noble Truths. But it's basically, this is my best kind of articulation of this key to freedom of the heart. It's what leads us to insight. It leads us to letting go. It leads us to freedom and potentially the deepest freedom possible in this human life. So I'll just pause here again just for a minute, invite you to just kind of see how that lands for you. See what's present in your heart and mind and body. Might this kind of way of looking is a really helpful in itself, is a helpful framework, because everything we're talking about in many ways is about ways of looking. We're kind of looking through the lens. Now, I put out a lens for you, which is essentially the Buddha's Four Noble Truths. I'm offering it, the Buddha is offering it as a lens through which you look at your own life. And I look at my own life. I say, okay, suffering, cause of suffering, end of suffering, path to end of suffering. Okay, that's a lens. So the idea of a way of looking can be tremendously helpful in approaching our experience. What is the way of looking? Loving kindness is a way of looking. If we choose loving kindness, and maybe I'll use that as a transition to the second main key, and that's the key of, I still call it the key of love, the key of the heart. I'm going to be kind of a lot briefer with this one, because we have talked a lot about compassion, about forgiveness, about loving kindness, about mudita, sympathetic joy, about gratitude. I think of gratitude as the fifth Brahma Vihara. the fifth of, it's not officially, it's just for me, it just feels so powerful that it could almost, if the Buddha had chosen to put it, we'd all be saying, oh, the 5 Brahma Viharas rather than the 4. Anyway, it's just my own kind of take on it, that it's really, really, really powerful. So that we can, really the second key is just to remember, just keep remembering that we can come back to love. And love, I use that word in its broadest sense of unattached, unclinging, large enough to include all of these expressions of love. I mentioned Gil Fronsdal's The 4 Faces of Love, love in its larger sense of that we can come back, that just again, a personal experience of, so many times, excuse me, so many times when I've found myself in a kind of stuck place or a contracted place, a place where I was definitely in a place of dukkha, where I couldn't quite find my way out of it because I was caught up in something and there wasn't enough clarity I couldn't think my way out of it, obviously, but I couldn't even kind of think my way out through the Dharma, through the teachings to kind of, how do I untangle this? But almost, I won't say every time, but so many, many, many times, coming back into my heart has been a way of untangling myself. And I found it's been for me almost magical. And I mentioned, I have people who I think of them as, I don't know what the best word is, but they're people who are now passed on from this life, who I see them as kind of supporters. I have, this may not come out clearly, but this is my mom on this here, and a family friend from Mrs. Hanley from, we grew up with their family. This was in Dublin in probably 2011 or so. And my mother, I can come back to thinking about her, and typically my heart can open, and it can be a kind of a doorway out of a lot of stickiness. And I recognize, and I have to be careful of this because I don't want to assume that everyone's parents, play the same role. My father, I was thinking about it the other day, was a good enough father. He was kind of absent. He worked nights, and it's kind of emotionally not as central. But I also recognize he was in the back of a plane for 5 years during World War II as a rear gunner, and came out of that war with all the traumas and stresses that weren't even addressed through therapy. Therapy wasn't even there, back in the 50s and 60s. And so I understand much more where he was coming from, and my heart opens to him. But my connection, with my mother, with the teacher I've talked about, Rob Babea, if anyone's interested, don't just dive into the middle of his teachings, because you might find yourself down a rabbit hole. Typically, he says, if you listen to this, good to have listened to these other 20 or 30 talks as well beforehand, because it's kind of a whole framework he's laying out, or start from the beginning. But he's an incredible teacher, and he talks very much in terms of these skillful ways of seeing. And a third one for me is Congressman John Lewis, who also died just last year, I think in June or July. Just when I think, particularly when I'm in the kind of political world, and I think of his courage, you probably know the story of him crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge on the march in Alabama back in 1965, and getting his head broken by the white policeman there, and and always keeping his heart open, right till the day he died. And I just use them as a kind of, for me, those are people that I can think about. And when I think about them, I feel strengthened. I feel I become more, open to connecting with my own courage and my own resilience, and I find my way back. And I just want to, reinforce what we've been saying a lot over the retreat is this coming back to our hearts, finding the way back. And it could be, the example I gave of thinking of individuals. The other way is just through the practices of loving kindness, and formally loving kindness and compassion, mudita, upekkha, equanimity, gratitude. All of these practices can help us and support us. So, much more can be said about, the way we can come back to our hearts. But I'm noticing I've got 9 minutes left in this talk, up to hopefully. And maybe just to pause again. Maybe think for a minute for, what are ways that help you back to your heart? Maybe it's somebody in your life that helps you, just thinking about them, bringing them into your heart. Or maybe it's a particular practice. Maybe it's not hard to do. Maybe you just kind of incline the mind back to compassion, loving kindness. Just having that, just knowing that you leave here with, this gift of the Dharma, if you wish, of remembering that you can come back to your own good heart, your own goodness, your own loving kindness, your own compassion, and you can cultivate it and deepen it. And the third gift I want to touch on, and this, could be an hour-long talk, very easily an hour-long talk in itself. So I'm just going to really do the highlight, to just highlight a few things. But it's the invitation to take on, and again, this is a way of looking or a way of seeing, take on the lens, the way of seeing of yourself as somebody, an awakening being, as a bodhisattva. In, a bodhisattva, the two words that make up bodhisattva, the first is bodhi, means awakening, connecting with the Buddha, that root. Bodhi, awakening, and sattva is a being. So it's a being of awakening, or an awakening being. And traditionally in Buddhism, and there's different framings of it within Theravada and Mahayana, and it's more developed in the Mahayana tradition, and it's often talked about in the Theravadan tradition of insight tradition, more as the Buddha, as a bodhisattva before he becomes a Buddha. And mostly I'll be talking about what's more in the Mahayana, but it's very much within the Dharma, in the big sense of the Dharma. And it's really a commitment. It's often framed in what seem like very heroic terms, a commitment that I'm even as I awaken, when I awaken, I will stay in the world until all, in this world of samsara, of suffering, until all beings are liberated. So it's really a generosity of heart, it's a compassion, it's a caring about the world, and a commitment to doing that. And it can seem heroic. There's traditional ways of the Bodhisattva vow or commitment is stated. One common way of saying it is, sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to eradicate them all. The gates of the Dharma are limitless. I vow to enter them all. The Buddha's way is inconceivable. I vow to attain it. So you might hear that, and if you were hearing it for the first time, you might either say, what grandiosity, what I'm going to do all of these things, but clearly it's not meant in those ways, and it's not taken in those ways. It's not the everyday mind that is taking on this vow. It's that deeper, Buddha mind, the mind of absolute trust, as the Sengsan's third Zen patriarch speaks of it, and it's really it's really pointing to the compassion, the open-heartedness with which we move towards our objective of serving all sentient beings. And so what I'm going to invite us to do in these remaining few moments is just to kind of think about, not in a heroic sense, because the other thing, it can seem like, oh, superheroes, I'm going to liberate all sentient beings, little old me going to liberate all these sentient beings. But it's much more about the commitment of the heart, of the dedication to the freeing of all beings. And Jack Kornfield, in his book The Wise Heart, describes 3 qualities of a bodhisattva, which I really resonate for me. And I'm just going to share these and talk a little bit about some expressions of these, in the real life expressions. And Jack says, she, he, they, I'll say they begin, the bodhisattva, someone making this commitment, begins by acknowledging and accepting the truth of their situation. This is the first step, first quality of the bodhisattva, to accept the truth of their situation. And so not that it's necessarily right or just, but rather that it's true. So one of the people I think of as a current a bodhisattva of our times is Nelson Mandela. I've always connected in a real, in a heart way with him, just an extraordinary human being, who transformed himself in 26 years in prison, 20 of them, nearly 20 years on Robben Island, in an 8-foot by 10-foot prison cell. How he didn't, at first I think the temptation was, he was very militant, he was still in his 20s and, struggling for freedom in the apartheid system of South Africa, racial separation, racial domination. And he was an angry young man, he's fighting, a liberation fighter. But when as he accepted, again, not accepting that it was right, but accepting this is where I am. I'm probably going to be here till the day I die, given the system as it was then. And he was given life imprisonment. But yet he accepted the truth of the situation. And as Jack says, the Bodhisattva faces the truth, turns towards the difficulties, and shines the light of understanding on them. So you think of, Mandela in his prison cell saying, okay, yeah, this is where I am right now. Where do I start from here? What do we do from here? The second quality, Jack says, is the Bodhisattva works to find peace within herself, himself, themselves, by engaging in a training or practices to let go of painful and afflictive states. So let go of the righteousness, let go of anger and hatred and greed, and developing positive ones like love, compassion. For Nelson Mandela, it was forgiveness, understanding, understanding of the people who were doing great harm and were punishing him for nothing, but nothing that he'd really done. So this is the second step, to work to find peace within. The Bodhisattva works to find peace within themselves. And the third, really important, is the Bodhisattva envisions actions and a path of freedom, a path of liberation for themselves, for their community and their world, and commits to working for those ends. So accepting the truth of the situation, facing the truth, working on themselves, on ourselves to find peace, and then envisioning a path of action and a path of liberation. And Jack says this about this envisioning. He says, envisioning has enormous power. With our vision and imagination, we can help create the future. Envisioning sets our direction, marshals our resources, makes the unmanifest possible. We'll share all this in the materials afterwards if you're eager to take it down. It's in Jack's book of The Wise Heart. And so I've already referred to Nelson Mandela. You know, what he does is he transforms himself. You know, I was really, there's a word in English, chuffed. You know, I was really joyful when I learned that Nelson Mandela meditated every day in prison. You know, and he wrote a letter to his wife, and Winnie Mandela, encouraging her to meditate. Oh, this is great. You know, not only is he, you know, he also meditates, you know. So, and obviously he had some way in which he transformed his own heart. You know, other people can do it through prayer, you know, and through other practices. It's not just meditation, but there was something that felt like a connection, like what we're doing and Nelson Mandela was doing. And I think of the Bodhisattva. Obviously, we can easily think of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, you know, as a true Bodhisattva of our time. Thich Nhat Hanh, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King nominated Thich Nhat Hanh for the Nobel Peace Prize back in 1967. You know, and this is 4 years later. Thich Nhat Hanh is in, you know, the last time, you know, what period of his life, but he's still teaching and still sharing the teachings of engaged Dharma, and just a whole teachings of heartfulness and how to be present and really alive, walking on the earth. He said the miracle is not to walk on water, but to walk on the earth. Not to walk on water, but to walk on the earth. So, you know, I think of many, many others. You know, I think of Rosa Parks sitting and refusing to go to the back of the bus. And she says, people always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in. The only tired I was tired of giving in. You know, just the courage of people, just somebody who says, no, this is wrong, this is immoral, this shouldn't continue. And having the heart and the courage to do that. And it's the Dharma that helps us. I'm using now the Dharma. It could be Christian, Jewish, Islamic Dharma, it could be, but it's the Dharma of the truth. It's the deepest truth, you know, within which the Buddha Dharma is a very fertile and very hugely valuable field. But I think of Dr. King, you know, who said to white segregationists, do to us what you will and we will still love you. But be assured that we will win our freedom. We will not only win freedom for ourselves, but we will appeal to your heart and conscience so that we will win you in the process. We'll win you in the process by appealing to your heart and conscience. And our victory will be a double victory. So it's not a victory over, but a victory by making the compassion, making the container large enough to include all of us, quote, us and them, conscious of time. So just a final few words on this, kind of to tie things up. The invitation to see this third gift, perhaps, of envisioning ourselves and our place in the world, envisioning ourselves as a, you know, whether we call ourselves a bodhisattva, but as wanting to bring our hearts into the world, to engage in the world, to see where we want to go and to move forward in that way, with the commitment of everybody else in the world is included in our compassion, in our wish for liberation. Nobody is excluded. Every sentient being is included. So coming back to the overall theme that, you know, as we enter into what is, you know, continues to be a very difficult and turbulent time, these teachings, this deep ocean of teachings as well as teachings from other traditions, but just focusing now on this ocean of teachings can be a huge support, a powerful support to us as we go into our lives, as we go into the year ahead. And perhaps, can help bring some courage. It's wonderful. It's great that, the way the word courage is connected with the word for the heart, core, cœur in French, core in cordus, I think in Latin, courage, that can give us courage, that these teachings, knowing that we can untangle ourselves from suffering, knowing that we can come back to the heart, and knowing that we can envision a path of liberation for ourselves and for all beings, playing our role in the freeing of all beings. And so whatever happens in the world, and we don't know, it's all uncertain, as we've been saying, whatever happens, we will perhaps be able to be that individual in the refugee boat that Thich Nhat Hanh talked about. He said, in the refugee boats, facing pirates and storms, if even one person could be peaceful, could be equanimous, then everyone was saved. But if there wasn't, then everyone would drown, was what he said. Can we envision ourselves, not in some heroic or grandiose way, but in a real heartful way, as wanting to be that person or those people who can bring that peace, bring that courage, that resilience, that sense of possibility and sense of hope into the world. So I'll finish here and just invite us to take, again, just 1 minute to take in. That's a lot. I realize I shared a lot today, a lot of kind of big picture things, but hopefully there's something here that you can take with you. Maybe breathing, connecting with whatever is alive for you in your heart, in your body, your mind. And finishing with this poem. It's called Walker. It's by the Spanish poet Antonio Machado, who died back in 1940, I think. Walker, your footsteps are the road and nothing more. Walker, there is no road. The road is made by walking. Walking, you make the road. And turning to look behind, you see the path you never again will step on. Walker, there is no road, only foam trails on the sea. Walker, there is no road, only foam trails on the sea. Thank you all for your very kind attention